The medieval continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, boasted a wealth that was unrivaled during its heyday. Spanning over a millennium, from the 4th to the 15th century, this remarkable civilization amassed enormous riches through a combination of its strategic location, robust economy, and cultural treasures. Geographically, the Byzantine Empire's position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia gave it a significant advantage. It controlled vital trade routes, including the Silk Road, which facilitated the exchange of valuable goods and ideas. This geographical advantage enabled the empire to be the middleman for the goods traveling east and west, and to tax trade effectively, contributing largely to its prosperity. However, at the same time, the empire's advantage of being situated at the crossroads between three continents also worked against it. Throughout the centuries, it was not uncommon for the Byzantines to find themselves surrounded on all sides by powerful enemies. While their military was a formidable force, there were times when Roman arms weren't strong or numerous enough to fend off multiple concurrent invasions. However, when the army wasn't enough to save the empire, the Byzantines could employ another weapon, their cunning diplomatic force and their vast treasury, to pay off invaders who sought to make a quick profit rather than wrestle lands from the empire's control. In this video, we will provide an overview of the main enemies Byzantium was always paying off, and just how much of a fortune in gold was bled out of the Eastern Romans' coffers over the years. This video is sponsored by our YouTube members and patrons, who get 2 exclusive videos weekly, not available anywhere else, for their kind support of our channel. You can join their ranks to watch more than 160 videos, including our series on the Pacific War, Punic Wars, Persian Wars, Spanish War of Succession, Russo-Japanese War, North African Campaign of World War II, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, Albigensian Crusades, and much more. Click the link in the description or pinned comment to get the exclusive videos, early access to all public videos, our schedule, wallpapers, access to a special Discord server where we're very active, and much more. Thanks for supporting us, we couldn't be doing it without your help. It is not within the scope of this video to cover every single foreign power the Byzantines ever provided tribute to, so we will focus on the empire's tributary relationship with a core of its historically most powerful rivals. By far the most notable example of an enemy that sucked the empire dry through tributes was the Huns. When we think of the Byzantines paying off their enemies, the Huns are usually the first to come to mind, and rightfully so, as they are most likely the people who received the most extensive amounts of tributes from the Eastern Romans. The Huns launched a large-scale invasion of the empire in 397, raiding both Thrace and through the Caucasus, reaching Armenia, Cappadocia, and even Syria. Yet it would be a few years later, around 400 or 401, when they would ask the empire for a small gift of gold. The Hunnic leader Uldin, who ruled an area near the lower Danube, captured and killed Gainas, a Goth who had previously been in service to the Byzantine emperor, but had since entered into open rebellion. In Constantinople, the reigning emperor Arcadius received Gainas' head as a gift of goodwill, along with an alliance proposal, which the Romans could purchase for yearly tribute in gold. Unfortunately, we do not know the amount of Roman gold the Hunnic leader was asking for, but judging from the continued intrusions and raids his horsemen conducted within imperial territory, it's likely that either he never received any, or at some point he became dissatisfied with the amount of gold Constantinople was sending and returned to his favourite pastime activity. However, Uldin wasn't the only Hunnic ruler in the area. Around his death in 412, a Byzantine diplomatic mission visited the territory of a man named Dimitris, who was quite likely a Roman now in service to the Huns. A Roman historian named Olympiodorus of Thebes, who was part of the embassy, informs us that the envoys not only exchanged oaths of friendship with him, but also proved to be very bad guests, assassinating their host. This was odd, considering the man had given no intention of turning hostile against the empire. However, it would make sense if he were a traitor, or if the imperial court suspected him of knowing vital information. Donatus' Hunnic king, a man named Cherato, was angered by the Romans, and was only persuaded to stay his horsemen from imperial lands after the ambassadors showered him with gifts of gold. While these gifts were of great value, we cannot be sure of their exact worth. The relationship between the Eastern Romans and the Huns becomes clearer in surviving records after more famous names begin making their appearance in history. Under the reign of Rugila and his brother Oktar, Hunnic aggression continuously grew as the steppe horsemen became aware of the weakness of the eastern part of the empire. In 422, a major Hunnic incursion into Thrace that even threatened Constantinople itself forced the Romans to conclude a humiliating peace treaty with the nomadic invaders, which included the annual payment of 350 libras, or Roman pounds, of gold. This treaty seems to have lasted until 432 or 433, when some barbarian tribes crossed the Danube to escape the Huns and sought refuge within imperial lands. Rugila sent a diplomat to demand the return of the refugees, but the Hunnic ruler died before the two sides could reach an agreement. Instead, a new treaty was negotiated between the Roman politician Plinter and the representatives of Rugila's heirs on the other. These heirs were none other than the famous Bleda and the most singularly iconic Hun of all time, Attila himself. With the new treaty secured, the refugees were returned, and more importantly, the annual gold tribute was raised to 700 libras. Bleda and Attila proved to be much more ferocious than their predecessors. After just 5 years, they decided the amount of gold the Romans were sending them was simply not enough to buy their peace. Taking advantage of the absence of a strong Byzantine force in the Balkans, the brothers launched a massive raid across all of Thrace, and even reached Constantinople, though the horde was ill-equipped to lay siege to the new Theodosian walls. While the Byzantine capital was safe, the countryside was not, and the utter devastation the Hunnic horsemen caused to the Thracian towns forced the Romans to buy their peace once again in 443. However, the price was astronomical, much higher than the previous time. The Huns demanded 6,000 libras of gold to be paid immediately and raised the annual tribute to 2,100 libras. They also demanded 12 solidi, or gold coins, for every refugee that hadn't been returned. Attila would return in 447, rampaging through the land and reaching as far south as Thermopylae. In the following year, he renegotiated a treaty with the Byzantines, though we're not sure if the tribute terms remained the same or changed. However, we know that from 450 onwards, the Romans regained confidence in their military capabilities and refused to pay any tribute. Now, before we move on to the next enemy to whom the Byzantines sent large amounts of gold, it's time for some math. If the first treaty with the Huns began in 422 or 423, then it roughly lasted for 10 years, which means that around 3,500 libras of gold were paid as tribute. To that, we have to add another 3,500 libras for the period between 435 to 440, and then the 6,000 libras of gold the Romans had to pay in 443, as well as the annual tribute of 2,100 libras for at least 4 years. So if the Byzantines did indeed transfer that amount of gold, the total would come to no less than 21,400 libras paid to the Huns. For perspective, that is the same weight in gold as approximately 38 fully grown grizzly bears. The second enemy that the Eastern Romans paid extensive tribute to was none other than Persia, which during the Byzantine Golden Age was ruled by the Sassanid dynasty. The Sassanids might not have conducted warfare in the manner of the Huns, but the tribute the Romans had to pay when they lost wars against Persia were of equal if not greater value than what they paid the Huns. The details of when and why the Romans started paying the Sassanids are unclear, and only become better defined with the tribute that Emperor Justinian I paid in 532 after signing the Perpetual Peace. This treaty came in the aftermath of the Iberian War of 527, in which the two sides were equally matched. Neither side prevailed on the field, as both factions had their fair share of victories and defeats, and little land was exchanged. However, the Romans were stretched thin at the time, set on their task of recovering the western part of the empire that had been lost to the Germanic kingdoms. Not wanting a prolonged second front of warfare while his armies were in Italy, and knowing that the Sassanid king Khosrau I was more open to negotiations than his father Kavad, Justinian sent out emissaries with the goal of securing a lasting peace with Persia, no matter the economic cost. The Perpetual Peace, so called because of its ostensibly infinite duration, bought Justinian's forces the time they would need at the cost of 110 centenaria, which is about 11,000 pounds of gold. Unfortunately, it didn't bring everlasting peace either, as hostilities between the two superpowers would resume 8 years later. The Lazic War, named after the province of Lazica on the eastern shore of the Black Sea, lasted for 20 years. and it seems from the writings of the Roman historian Procopius that the empire was still paying an annual tribute of 4 centenaria until at least 551, despite the ongoing hostilities. The war would conclude in 562, resulting in a victory for Sassanid Persia, with the status quo antebellum preserved. The Byzantine representative, Peter the Patrician, signed in the name of Justinian a 50-year-long peace treaty, which forced the Persians to recognize Lazica as a vassal state of the empire, but on the other hand, included a hefty annual tribute of around 420 pounds of gold the Romans had to pay to the Sassanids. The treaty would remain in effect for 10 years, until 572, when Khosrau's ambassador came to Constantinople to see if the Byzantines would abide by the treaty. He was treated with hostility by Justin II, and instead of gold, received an answer that the Romans were fully ready for war. Thus, the war between the two sides resumed in full force, but after 2 years, the decline of Emperor Justin's mental health and the fall of Dacia forced the Romans to seek a truce. In 574, Justin's wife, Empress Sophia, sent an envoy to the Persian king and managed to negotiate a 1-year-long truce along the Mesopotamian front in exchange for a sum of 45,000 numismata. The truce would later be extended for another 3 years for the annual payment of 30,000 numismata until hostilities resumed in 578. This wasn't the last time the Sassanians extracted tribute from the Byzantines, and their wars continued well into the 7th century. However, we do not know the amount of gold that was transferred. Yet, even when taking into account the agreed tributes we have mentioned so far, the amount of Roman gold that went into Sassanid hands reaches 21,690 pounds, or 48 shekeloniels, just a bit more than the amount we calculated for the Huns. While Sassanid Persia was the great enemy the Romans faced in the east, in the Balkans they had to face the Avars, who fled from the Göktürk Khaganate and established their own kingdom in the Carpathian Basin. The Avars' systematic raiding of imperial lands soon forced the Byzantines to send gifts and tributes to stave off their attacks. In 574, they signed the first treaty of a fixed annual tribute, which was set to 80,000 numismata. This was but the beginning of a literal flood of gold that followed, as, over the next decades, the Avars relentlessly raided and pillaged Roman land, managing to raise the amount of tribute to 100,000 numismata in 585, 120,000 in 598, 140,000 in 604, and 200,000 in 623. This would put the total amount of gold numismata the Avars were able to extract solely as tribute from the Byzantine emperors to over 6 million coins, or around 84,000 pounds of gold, or 240,000 sticks of butter if you prefer, an amount that dwarfed the tribute the empire had paid to the Huns and the Persians. Another long-standing enemy of the Byzantines was the Arabian Caliphates, which replaced the Sassanids as the primary eastern enemy of the Romans in the 7th century. Because the Arabs constituted a formidable foe for a long period of time, it's harder to calculate the amount of tribute the Byzantines paid when they found themselves on the losing side of conflicts against them. Local treaties would often go unrecorded, or the amount of gold wasn't specified. But there are instances where we have detailed accounts of the treaties between the two states. For example, we know that in 782, Empress Irene agreed to pay an annual tribute to the Abbasids of 160,000 numismata, an agreement she broke just 2 years later. However, renewed Arab action against the empire under Harun al-Rashid forced Irene to renew the agreement in 798. The payment of the tribute stopped around 803 with Nikephoros' ascension to the Byzantine throne, compelling the Abbasids to begin once again raiding to extract more tribute. In 806, the Caliph and the Byzantine emperor agreed to a truce on the terms that Nikephoros paid the moderate amount of 30,000 numismata. At this point, we'll have to cut the video short. We have almost covered the first half of Byzantium's life, and adding another 6 centuries to that would make the video excruciatingly long. Besides, after the military revival of the empire of the Macedonian and Angelos dynasties, during which the empire more often extracted tribute than offered, a hard decline followed, and the empire never recovered. While we know that Byzantium paid tribute to both Seljuks and later Ottoman Turks, when taking into consideration the empire's meager economic strength, these payments would pale in comparison to those received by the Avars or the Huns. However, before we say goodbye, we will try to determine how much all that gold would be worth translated into modern US dollars. From the tributes to the Huns, we have gathered around 21,400 pounds of gold. To that we have to add the £21,690 that were attributed to the Sassanids, and of course the astronomical amount of the £84,000 of gold that were transferred to the Avars. Finally, we will add in the roughly £16,000 we know went as tribute to the Abbasids, although in all likelihood the caliphates extracted much more. After tallying this up, we arrive at a total of 143,090 Roman pounds. With a Roman pound being roughly the equivalent of 1/3 of a kilo, we end up with approximately 47,697 kilos of gold. While the price of gold fluctuates, gold was traded for around $80,000 per kilo at the time this script was written. With simple multiplication, and assuming all our previous calculations are correct, we find out that Byzantium spent no less than $3,815,760,000 on tributes alone, a truly astonishing sum. While this number might seem huge, it also lies on the lower end of the spectrum of the total amount of tribute the Byzantines paid to their enemies over the years, as there are treaties, wars, and factions we did not take into account in this video. Furthermore, we have to assume that the empire did keep its promises and paid the agreed amount to the other party. But that might not have always been the case. While the roughly $4 billion the empire sent to keep its peace is a vast amount, we must not forget that Byzantium also received tribute from many of its adversaries when it was victorious in its wars. For example, the caliphates paid roughly the same amount of numismata in annual tributes when they lost as Empress Irene did. Overall, the amount of gold that moved around the ancient and early medieval world was staggering, and a testament to the scale and stakes at play when the giants of the age went to war. More videos on economic stories such as this are on the way. To make sure that you don't miss them, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would not be possible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.